Shalom, shalom. So nice to see you. How are you?
Okay, had a little problem this morning. Nothing is easy.
Well, what do they say? You had a problem, but what's the alternative? Not to have problems. No, I think we'll keep on having problems, eh? Yes. So you're in Virginia, we said, and I didn't do my homework, so I will ask you a slightly uncomfortable question, but I bet you're happy to answer it. How old are you?
Oh, I'm 100 years old now.
Wow.
I hate to admit it, but that's
Why?
what it is.
Why do you hate to
Yeah,
admit
I
it?
was born in August of 1925.
Where were you born?
Um, I was born in Breslau, which is now Polish and called Wrocław.
Yes, and you got out of there very early. You got out of Europe before.
Well, I got out there in 1938 when I was 13, and it was just a week or so before the Crystal Night.
Hmm.
So, and you know, uh, when my mother asked me, should we go? And I knew what she meant to join my father in the States. Um, the smartest thing I ever did at that point was not worry about all my friends that I had or the soccer team that I was on and so forth, uh, and my cousins and such. I said, let's go.
Two
And
words.
had I procrastinated, we might have been delayed. And a week later,
Wow.
we would have gotten stuck. We never would have gotten out.
Now that was you and your mother. Did you have any other brothers or sisters then?
No, I was the only child. I was the only child, spoiled as anything, of course.
Was
And
anything.
that's if I would have said, no, I don't want to go, it would have been a problem. Yeah.
That's amazing. And you say you were 13 then.
I was 13. Yeah.
So did you celebrate your bar mitzvah in Roslau?
Yeah. Well, that's what it was. I had a wonderful bar mitzvah and I got a BMW bicycle and I got goodness how many pen and pencil sets because people didn't know what else to give me. But it was after the party that my father said, I can't economically support the family anymore. I got to go to the United States and find my distant relatives to get an affidavit. And then, well, I can tell you the story as it goes now. What happened was that he got to the States, he found his relatives, but because of the Depression, they didn't have enough money to provide the affidavit because the affidavit has a requirement that the person who receives this cannot become a burden to the government.
In the United
So they had to
States.
have enough money to support the family. So my father thought, oh, this was a terrible thing, but it ended up saving him because while he's gone now, and he stayed a little longer because he's trying to find somebody else to get him an affidavit. Two Gestapo people came to our door looking for him. And my mother immediately remembered when they said to the minute he comes back, he has to report to Gestapo headquarters. We had a um, business friend by the name of Michaelis who was told the same thing. And a few hours later, after he reported, they found him on the sidewalk in front of the building. He had either jumped or been pushed out of a third story window.
Wow.
So my father was told immediately by my mother, don't come back. And then just a few days later, a British lady came to our door, and she had an official document that stated we have to provide her with a bedroom in our apartment. And my mother took me aside and said, now be careful what we say here because she's the Gestapo informant. But she was British and she gave me 2 English lessons. And I didn't realize how important that was. Well, anyway, uh, at that point also, uh, the passports of Jews were collected to be stamped with a big J. And that was not the Germans who had initiated that. The Swiss had initiated that by asking the Germans to somehow identify the people who were Jewish so that they knew that these people were not visitors but refugees, and they didn't want any refugees. So the Germans were very happy to accommodate and get those J's stamped into the passports. But
Unbelievable.
that's how it went because nobody wanted you as a refugee. Now, what happened with all that? My mother got worried that the next thing was a confiscation of the passports. So she went to the American consulate in Breslau and got herself a visitor's visa, just like my father had. But because they didn't have computers, they didn't realize my father was already in country. Had they recognized that, she never would have gotten a visa because then it would have been obvious we were refugees.
Obviously, you were
Well,
doing. It would have been obvious that you
yeah,
were doing what you were actually doing.
well, of course, um, I was completely out of it. My mother didn't discuss this with me, and she got the visa. And completely out of character, she went back the next day and bribed somebody to put me on that visa as well. And it was easy because I was already on her passport, and all they had to do was write in and son. And my name was Franz in those days, and son Franz. And then we were able to leave, and so she got me one fine day, a few days later, said, "Shall we go?" After she got me outside, and I knew exactly what she meant. And the smartest thing I ever did in my life was I said,
Let's go.
"Let's go,"
Now,
because I had
tell
all
me.
these friends and all these people that I knew and such, and I disregarded it because I realized we were not wanted in that country. Now I was 13 years old, and to this day, I'm still happy that I was smart enough to say, let's go, because as a single son, I was spoiled and I could have
Tell
procrastinated
me.
too long.
How religious was your family? How orthodox were they?
Well, at that point, we were pretty religious. I remember we had to walk to the synagogue on a Saturday because we wouldn't take the streetcar. And my mother had a kosher household, and we went to the synagogue every Sabbath. And yeah, we were pretty religious
So
at
did
those
you
points.
for your bar mitzvah, did you read from the Torah?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, there were 2 of us who had the bar mitzvah on the same day. and we had to have a lot, and I was the one who was the winner, and I could select the Haftarah as well as a small segment of the Torah, while the other one only got the Torah segments.
Okay. And were you living near your grandparents?
No, no, no. We were living all by myself, and I didn't really have many grandparents left in those days.
Wait.
My father's mother was still alive, but my mother had lost both her parents by then.
Wow.
I mean, this was all normal. This
Right.
was not a Nazi situation.
So that was it. The week before Kristallnacht, you guys had the visa. So what did you do?
Yeah, well, as I indicated, she asked, "Shall we go?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, tomorrow we'll go." And I had one more soccer game to play. And I went, but I helped them lose the game. I was distracted. And at the end, I said, "See you next time." But I knew darn well it was no next time. And my mother had imprinted on me that I was not to tell anybody that we were going. And I never heard or found out what happened to those kids, because if they hadn't taken some measure after Kristallnacht, it was almost impossible to get out of there because nobody wanted refugees.
Okay. So that next day, your mother and you took a little valise, and you went to. You didn't go to the airport.
Yeah, well, all we were allowed to take out was one suitcase each and 10 marks. So we were immediately at the mercy of the Jewish relief
In the
organizations.
United States.
When when my when we got there and met my father, we had a joyful reunion, but he said we're not out of the woods because the relief organization said the minute you have an affidavit, you have to go back to the States and wait till you're invited to come in.
Not back to the States, back to
And
Germany,
at that point, it
back to
would have been
Poland.
impossible because we had left that place with the Gestapo informant in charge, and she would have made a disposition. So if we had to go back, we would have ended up in a
For
concentration
sure.
camp. Yeah. And of course, the big deal was it was all luck and not planned, but we couldn't have planned it better. Getting there on the 30th of October 1938 with a crystal night on 9th November, President Roosevelt, with all the news that was going on in the papers, because this hit all over the place, in all the nations and well in the United States, and we read about this Crystal Night situation. Oh, they didn't call it Crystal Night at that point, but we were real worried about all our relatives that we had left as to what would happen to them. And on the other hand, while this was a catastrophe, for us, it saved us because he issued, that's Roosevelt issued an executive order that indicated that no one would be forced to return to Germany if they were in country, which meant our visas were extended indefinitely and we were saved.
When did you become an American citizen?
Well, no, we were on a visitor's visa, and but even in that situation, after this was when I was 13, and then the war started when I was 16, and at that point I thought, oh well, I was happy the war started because I knew when the United States finally got into it with Pearl Harbor that we were going to win. I had no question about that, and I was happy about that. But I thought, well, it wasn't going to affect me because I was only 16. Well, it didn't take too long before I realized, whoops, this thing is taking much longer than I thought. And when I became 18 and in August of 1943, I was drafted in September,
You were
only one
already
month later.
when you were drafted.
And
When
well, when you're yeah,
when you were drafted, you were already an American citizen.
no, wasn't a citizen. Now, I didn't know this, but I couldn't have volunteered. As a non citizen, you couldn't volunteer, but you could be drafted and you could decline the draft because you were not a citizen. But I didn't even know that, and I was drafted. And you get into the army on the first day. They give you your uniforms and so forth, and then on the second day they show you a couple of movies, and then on the third day you go on KP and kitchen police. They wake you up at 4 in the morning, and you're in the kitchen until about 8 o'clock at night, and you had to peel potatoes. And now looking back, this was a complete waste of time because now they give you the potatoes with a peel on it. You have to peel it yourself. Well, anyway, and then on the fourth day, you get orders to go to basic training. Well, everybody who came into the army with me got their orders, but I didn't. So I go back to my sergeant. I remember his name still, Sergeant DeGarellis. Sergeant DeGarellis, I said, how come I didn't get orders? He said, let me go and check. So he comes back. He said, well, it's obvious. You're an enemy alien. I said, I'm an enemy alien? Sure. You were born in Germany. You came over on a German passport. It was a visitor's passport, and you never got naturalized. So you're German as far as the government's concerned, and Germany's the enemy. So they have to investigate you by the FBI. And I thought to myself, oh my God, I'm going to get KP for the rest of the time that they investigate me. I said, Son DeGarellis, I have to tell you something. I'm not completely ignorant about the military because I had ROTC in high school. That's Reserve Officer Training Course, and I had um, a session of that also in my summer term in colleges, which I had just completed before I got drafted. So I know the close order drill, I know the terminology, I know the tactics and all kinds of stuff. He said, well, I'm glad you told me that because I'll make you an acting gadget. What's an acting gadget? He said, well, don't let it go to your head, but here's an armband with corporal stripes. And you're not a corporal, you're just an acting corporal. So when these new recruits come in, you being now a veteran of 4 days in the Army, you form them up and you march them to the theater to see the two films that you saw when you came
That's your
in.
job.
I said, thank goodness, no KP. And sure enough, the new recruits came in, I formed them up, and up, 2, 3, 4, up, 2, 3, 4. I had them marching through the theater, and we saw those two films. The first one was Why We Fight. It was a very good orientation of why we were in the war. The second one was How to Avoid Venereal Diseases. I saw that movie more times than anybody else in the United States Army. Anyway, I was happy because it was not KP. Well, then it took about 3 months for the FBI to investigate me, and I got my orders to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, and went to Fort Benning. And 3 weeks later, they took me to Columbus, Georgia, the federal district court, and I was sworn in as a U.S.
Baruch
citizen.
Hashem.
Boy, was I happy. I left that terrible no more enemy alien business, and I was now like
Frank,
everybody.
before you go on, you jumped over your 3 years, your 3 first years in the United States. You were in Virginia from the very beginning?
No, we were in New York. We were in
And
New
what did your
York.
parents
We
what did your
found
parents what did your
uh,
parents do? What did your parents do?
well, they were not allowed to work, and we were at the mercy of the relief organizations. And as I indicate, they we wanted to get that affidavit, but with an affidavit, we would have had to
Yes.
go back to Germany to wait.
So
we
so
got
so
invited.
President
So
so,
it was a bad
so
situation.
President Roosevelt made an executive order that you don't have to go back to Europe.
Yeah.
So
And-
what did you do? Did you
And I became a citizen before my parents ever got
Wow.
naturalized. What they had to do was they had to go to Canada for one day and then technically come in as immigrants with the affidavit
From
that
Canada.
they finally got.
And that's what
Yeah.
they did? But
Yeah.
they did that after. They did that after.
But I never had to do that. I got it without
So
anything.
again, I don't understand. For 3 years, you didn't have you had no income. It was just you were just living off the relief organization.
That's right. It was a rough thing. We were living in a sublet 1 bedroom from a Greek family who also gave us kitchen privileges. So the 3 of us were in 1 bedroom and we had kitchen privileges. And that's how it went.
Where do you remember where? Do you remember where in New York you were? Because I'm originally from New York. I might recognize it.
Oh, I haven't been back in New York in a long, long time. But even when I went back, it was all kinds of things had changed.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
No,
You never can
were
go
you in,
back to
were
anything.
you in the Lower East Side? Were you in Brooklyn? Do you remember?
No, we were in Manhattan in the Midtown at 108th Street and between Amsterdam and Broadway.
The Upper West Side.
It was an Irish neighborhood of all things. And I was the only Jewish kid in that block. And all my friends were Irish, but they treated me nicely.
Much better than they did in Breslau, that's for sure.
Absolutely, much better than now. I don't think I'd have been treated as well now if I were
Now
there.
again.
But by now, it's no longer an Irish neighborhood. It's now a black neighborhood.
That's right.
It became Puerto Rican, and then it became
that's
black.
pretty much Harlem already.
It's amazing how these things changed. Yeah.
Okay, so then you were in the Army, and your parents were hoping to get American citizenship stateside. Did they move to Virginia before you went to the Army? No.
Well, no, they never moved. What happened was when I came back, I was stationed in Virginia. So I still had time in the Army and I needed to finish. And I did get back to New York and I went to CCNY and I finished. But before I even finished, I got married. And when I got married, I I was I knew I was going to take the Army commission, which I got when I graduated. And when I got that, we had to go to Virginia. Well, by then my father had died, and my mother had met another man, and she was getting married. My father died 1 week after I returned
Oh
from
my
the
gosh, was
war.
he ill? He was ill.
Yeah, yeah. So it was about 3 years later when I graduated and I got married and she got married. And she stayed in New York with her husband while I got orders and had to go to the Washington
Okay.
area. And that's where I stayed from then on, except for all the overseas tours that I had.
Okay, I won't ask you another question. Continue your story.
Oh, okay. Well, uh, uh, I told you how it was when I got into the army, and well, it was certainly different because I got married before I got my graduation, and uh, I was a well thought of person with all the advantages of my wife working and supporting me until I finished college. And so she was in charge there for a number of months. That's right. Well, of course, when I got the orders, uh, we went off to the Washington area, and as I indicated, that was my permanent home from then on. Uh, and well, uh, I always ended up with assignments in Germany because I spoke German. So, uh, uh, total, I had 4 tours in the army in Germany, and each one was about 3 years. The first one was during the war when I was still single, and the other three were when I was married and I was able to take Paula along with me uh, for my 3 year
That was
stint.
after the war.
The only
Was
time I
that was
ever,
that after the war was over?
uh, yes, that was after the war. Because after the war, I went to
Right.
college in New York for three
What did
years.
you get? What did you
And then I
study?
got
What
my
did you study?
commission.
What did you study in college?
Well, it was funny. Uh, when just before I got drafted, I had a summer term and I had no idea what I would do with myself. But all my friends were engineers, and I thought, well, I'll be an engineer. And I took 3 subjects for the summer term. One was math, one was physics, and one was ROTC. I got an A in ROTC, I got a D in physics, and an F in math, and and I was on probation when I came back from the army at CCNY, and by then I knew I wasn't going to be an engineer. I saw what the engineers did, and I didn't want any part of it. So I switched over to psychology and education, and that was my major from then on. and of course I got out of my uh, probable my starters in CCNY, and I became a regular
Very
student
good.
again after one term, which I did very well in. And well, of course, I got married before I graduated. She supported me, and we then got the degree, and then what I went uh, when I went to Korea, which was after the war. My wife went back to CCNY and got her
Oh,
degree. So she got a degree much later, and most of that was my fault.
what did she get her degree in?
Yeah, she was in
Also.
education. She became a teacher. Yeah.
So this was in the late 40s that both of you got your degrees.
Uh, well, I graduated in 1949, and we were married in 1948. She didn't get a degree until 19 in the 1950s. Somewhere.
I see. I see. So you were married. You
Yeah,
were married.
after the
You
after
were
the
married in
Korean War.
1948. You say yes. So
Yes, that's correct.
1948.
We were married for
Whoa.
72 years, and then
Ay,
she
ay, ay.
died.
But let's go back to the beginning. 1948. That's a very well-known number.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's 3 November
So you got
1948.
married. You
That's
got
my,
married after
yeah,
May 1948 when
yep.
Israel
Oh, really? Oh,
when
goodness.
Israel was
Yeah.
established.
And you did it in Israel.
Yes. So what was your relationship?
Where were you
No,
living
no, 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 no,
before?
no. Forget about me. We're talking about you. I wanted to know. I wanted to know how you felt about Israel, about Palestine, what was going on over there then.
Well, of course, we were always
Right.
watching the news very tightly to see what was going on. And there was, uh, well, we were not that comfortable as to who was going to win because it was a terrible situation. All these Arab states were all aligning themselves
Right.
against Israel. And boy, we were sweating blood as to how, if they were going to succeed. And of course, I had relatives in Israel. Some of my father's brother, his family with two girls my cousins who I knew very well, they were going to Israel, and we were
Did
real
they
worried
did they
about
go to
all
Israel before or after the Holocaust?
that. It was just
Just like
before.
you.
Yeah, yeah. They were there during the war. Because I remember we were worried about
And
them.
you were in
Yeah.
touch with them?
Oh,
You
absolutely.
wrote letters
Yes.
to each other.
Yes. Yeah. With letters. Yeah. No phone calls. That was just out of.
It's amazing. So wow. So
Yeah.
that was a long, long time ago. Did you keep in touch with their family after the state of Israel was founded?
We kept in touch for a very long time. But then after the various moves that we had when I was in the army, these things got completely out of kilter, and we lost
Okay, all right.
contact. Uh,
So and you were involved with the Jewish community in the army in Washington in New York.
Yes. That was in the beginning of when I was still going to college. Yeah.
Wow.
hmm And that was after the
Amazing,
war.
amazing, amazing. And
Yeah. Things were not that
your wife,
easy.
your wife Paula, was she born in the United States?
Paula, she was born in Brooklyn. Yeah. She didn't want to admit that because she was so young when they moved out of Brooklyn, and whenever she said I was born in Brooklyn, people would ask her, "How about Bath Avenue or whatever?" And of course, she had no idea about Brooklyn. She couldn't answer the
'Cause my
question.
mother was also born in New York. I don't remember if it was a Brooklyn or the Bronx. Um, I think she was born in 1927. When did you say you were born? In 1925.
25.
And Paula, how much younger was she
Yeah,
than
I
you?
was 2 years
Right.
older than her
When
mother.
was Paula born? What year was she born?
Um, uh, Paula was born in 1928. So I was
So
3 years
I would
older.
say, well,
Yeah.
maybe my mother and Paula knew each other, but there were millions of Jews in New York at the time, so who knows?
Yeah. Uh, well, she went to a girls' high school.
Really?
I'm trying to remember the name of it. I can't
A
think of it
Jewish
now.
religious girls' high school?
Yeah. No, this was a
A
public
public
school.
girls only high
Uh,
school?
but she
Yeah.
was Jewish, of course, but not as religious as we were.
So interesting.
So, when we got married, well, this, it
I
slipped.
understand.
Yeah. I still managed to get to the synagogue
Once in a
once in
while.
a while for Saturday. Yeah. And we used to go Friday nights.
It's pretty
Yeah.
good. Okay,
Yeah.
so tell me.
And we did that even in Germany when we were in a place where they had a small congregation, and in some instances was just the army that got together, the Jews in the army, to have a
Right.
Friday night
You're
service.
talking about, of course, after the
Yeah,
war. So your wife was with you in Germany?
yeah, yeah, with
Oh, that's
Paula.
wonderful.
Mhm. And we went to services, and we always had a rabbi. Um, he usually was on active duty, and he had his services organized for Friday night.
Okay, so how long were you in the and what were you doing in the army?
Ah, well, because of the war, when I finally got the option for the regular army to sign up, I wanted to go into intelligence because that's where I was in the war. But at that point, uh, and we're talking about 1949, well after the war, intelligence was still not a regular army branch. It was only a reserve branch. It got to be a regular army branch in
Okay.
1952. Well, by then I had 3 years in the army already, and I had selected what I thought was the closest related, and I became an MP. So all my army career, I was a military
Was that
policeman.
connected to intelligence?
No, no, but after 3 years, you're pretty well grounded in what you're doing. So I didn't opt to make a
I
branch
understand.
change. I stayed in the MP.
So again in the war you were in intelligence. So
Yeah.
could you tell me a little bit
Uh,
about maybe some war stories?
oh, sure. Well, uh, the assignment, um, I, the thing was a little complicated because most of the people who were drafted were after basic training were sent to Fort Ritchie. Well, it was Camp Ritchie at the time, Camp Ritchie, Maryland, where they had a lengthy course in intelligence, and when they came out, they became intelligent agents, and they didn't wear rank. They wear US, and nobody knew who was an officer and who was enlisted, and you couldn't tell the difference. Well, now I ended up in basic. As you know, I had to wait until I got to basic training, and when they told me into to go into basic training. It was a basic training course for people who had been in college. And what they promised was when you finish uh, college, when you finish the basic training, you go back to college and get a degree and become an officer. Well, and it wasn't my choice. That's just what the Army did. And I thought it was sort of ridiculous because I had only one summer term, so it would have taken me 3 years to finish. And well, at that point, I didn't know it, but the war would have been over by then. And before before the basic training was over, somebody else finally recognized that this was stupid, that they really didn't mean to have more officers. What they needed was infantry, and I ended up
Oh,
becoming an infantryman by being placed in the 87th Infantry Division in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. So uh, I got uh, advanced infantry training in Fort Jackson, and at that point, uh, sometimes there we had a training mission, and I was placed on the training team to prepare for poison warfare because the Germans had used gas
right.
in World War I, and we weren't going to get surprised. Well, the instructor wanted to jazz up the training a little bit, and he drew a grenade, which he thought was going to be a smoke grenade. And when he threw it, now I was on the team and I had my gas mask on, but he didn't. And he threw this grenade, and it was white phosphorus. White phosphorus burns. He got the blast in his face, and he's been disfigured for
Right.
life. Now I got it uh, around my ears at the mash of the gas mask, and I got it on my hands and the wrists, and the backpack caught
Oh,
fire.
yeah,
I
yeah.
got rid of that. I dashed into the dispensary. They didn't know what it was at first until the instructor came in and he knew white phosphorus. So they put my hands into a bucket of water that stops the burning and applied white compresses to my ears. And I was in the hospital for about a month or so to recuperate. And when I got back, they had progressed in training from 1 5 mile full field march to 25. And about 15, they had to take me back with a jeep because I was conking out and I was not a good infantryman. So when they had the requirement to ship out replacements to refurbish the losses they had sustained in the invasion, I went as a replacement infantryman through England and then France and then into Belgium. And, you would think they need the replacements right away, but these things took a long time. I was 3 weeks in England, same in France, and then in Belgium, but no training. We never knew what I could do. I remember, I remember in England, after the day's duty, we snuck out through a fence line to go into town and to meet some girls. And there were dances going on. And the hole in the fence was funny because the officers were doing the same thing. And we saluted the officers as they went through the fence and then let them have precedence. And then we went after them. Well, anyway, but oh, it wasn't until I got into Belgium that they finally found out I spoke German. So they took me and sent me back to Le Vessenay near Paris for a 2-week course in intelligence, which was taken from the Ritchie course. And but they needed me so badly, so after 1 week they pulled me out, and I joined this intelligence team, which was composed of 2 officers, 2 interpreters, a driver, and a sergeant in charge. And well, the officers and the interpreters didn't wear rank. Oh, so I came out of 1 week training a full-fledged intelligence agent, well trained and ready, and joined the team. And we went to Luxembourg, where we got hooked up into a larger intelligence force called T-Force, 12th Army Group, right under Bradley, that went from Eisenhower to Bradley, and was at that level that we got our orders. And we went back into Belgium, and 3 weeks after we arrived in Belgium, the Battle of the Bulge broke out. So we were committed in that. And well, the first night was a catastrophe. There were rumors going around, and there's German paratroopers all around, and they were shooting during the night. There was nothing to shoot at. There was nobody there. They were still much further away from us, but nobody knew nothing. And I knew I was placed on a road, an access dirt road, small road, with instructions, don't let any Germans come in. And I had my carbine and I had a flashlight, and I'm standing in the middle of the road, and the first vehicle comes on. I say, halt, halt, halt. And he stops. He said, what the hell are you doing? I said, I'm making sure you're not a German. He said, well, if I were German, you'd be dead. Get in the ditch over there. I thought that wasn't such a bad idea. I got into the ditch, and the next vehicle came along, and I'm yelling, halt, halt, halt. They don't hear me. They go right past. I'm not doing my job. So I don't know, should I stand? It's not, they should have had at least another man with me, but nothing. Anyway, about midnight, they called me back, thank goodness. And we were going on a blackout move towards Antwerp. What we didn't know was that Antwerp was the target of the German breakthrough. They wanted to hit that port and divide the lines between us and the British and have supplies coming through the port. But the Germans never got to
Yeah.
Antwerp, and we never got to Antwerp. When we got to Namur in Belgium, we got orders to see if we could intercept German who had infiltrated through our lines wearing U.S. uniforms, four in a Jeep. And they were creating havoc in back of our lines, blowing up things and switching signs around and whatnot. Well, now this wasn't such a terrible mission, because we had to circulate through Belgium to see if we could find, but it was miserable because
Right.
of the weather. The weather was the worst winter that they had seen in Europe for years. It was brutally cold and wet. So you either had freezing rain or snow or sleet coming down, and we had to drive around with a Jeep with the windshield down because you can't shoot through a windshield. And that blast of air, even going 25 miles an hour, was just brutal. And I was a PFC, I was in the back seat. Even though I had a US, they knew who I was except for my driver. My driver didn't know my rank, and he outranked me. He was a Spec 5. And but I always ordered him around because he didn't know that he outranked me. But anyway, uh, I was in the back seat and I got behind the captain and he shielded me a little bit, but not enough for me not to freeze. But I never told him that he was doing a good job for me. Well, anyway, we never intercepted anybody, but we came upon a infantry roadblock that half an hour before had wiped out one of those four in a Jeep. The Jeep was uh, over on the side, and four Germans in American uniforms were on the grass, and we searched them, and all we found were dog tags. They had American dog tags. And of course, we turned those in. These were either POWs or
Right. How did you
dead
know that they were
Americans.
Germans?
But we
How did you
found
know
no
that they were
other
Germans?
intelligence. Oh, just the haircut and the facial uh,
Amazing.
configurations, we could tell. I don't know how they, well, they didn't know the password, that did it. And then further interrogations, they just blasted them with a bazooka. They knew they were Germans.
Interrogation.
Yeah.
Wow, 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 wow.
Well, anyway, well, here's another story. Things don't always go like they're supposed
Of
to go.
course.
We're circulating now, cold as it was, brutally, and you could tell the captain didn't quite know where we were because he was looking at the map and looking around, looking at the map, and it's not healthy. So we said, Captain, let's find out where we are. We were just passing a unit that was deployed on a little hillside, and he was reluctant. But finally, we convinced him. There was a lieutenant up on the
Hill.
up on the little hillside with a table that he'd gotten out of a farmhouse, and on it were maps, even though there was dew coming down, and it was still brutally cold. And he got to the lieutenant. He didn't want to admit he was lost. And instead of asking, show us on a map where we are, he said, I'm Captain Intelligence. I want to get a briefing of the situation. The lieutenant looked him up and down and wasn't very much impressed. He said, we got word about 4 crowds in American uniforms, and you guys fit the pattern. Well, of course, we're not that. He said, okay, what's the 5th general order? Well, there were 12 general orders, and every soldier knew what they were. Captain had been an officer, and he didn't know. He said, okay, what's the Star Spangled Banner? He starts reciting. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's, he gets stuck. He starts singing. So, in the meantime, the other interpreter down there saw that more and more people were gathering around. So he wanted to check what's going on. He came rushing up the hill. Yeah. Oh, I thought you had a question. Oh, he comes down rushing up the hill, and he has a terrible German accent. He was a refugee just like me, but I had gotten rid of my accent and he hadn't. So he comes up and he said, what goes on here? Well, that was enough for them to hear that. A rifle ends up in my belly, a rifle in the captain's belly, a rifle in Flo's belly. We called him Flo. And they went down and got the driver, and the 4 of us were now prisoner of war of the Americans in the cold out there, and all that because the captain didn't know what the hell he should be doing. and it took them 7 hours before they got convinced that we were actually Americans. Because when they interrogated me, where were you born? In Germany. Well, that doesn't help, Well, anyway, the lieutenant says, get the hell out of here. And the captain says, when we got together, he said, don't let anybody, don't say anything about this to anybody. No, sir. When we got back, they had heard all about it. They came running and I said, hey, what goes on here? I couldn't live that one down.
I'm hear that they did not kill you on the spot.
Well, that took another week before the weather finally lifted. Wow. The sun came out, and our planes started to come over, and we were cheering the planes because we knew that was going to change the entire situation. And of course it did. And then we finished with the circulation in Belgium. I guess they had gotten rid of all the infiltrators by then, and we had to rest in a small little town in Belgium near Liège, and we got R&R, rest and recuperation options to go into Liège, and we finally got a shower. And I got a shower. I was in there for 20 minutes, and they were yelling, "Get the heck out of there!" I wouldn't move. To this day, when I take a bath, and now I take a bath, I always remember the time of the bulge when I finally got a nice shower and I enjoy my bath, thinking back at the time that I didn't have any options to get cleaned up until Liège. Well, anyway, it took about 3 months because until we got reconstituted and moved back into Germany. They had been in Germany and had captured Aachen, but they lost Aachen in the bulge again, and we had to recapture it. And that was about
Wow.
3 months later. And then first uh, first target city was Cologne. Now our mission was to go into these big cities right after they were captured
Yes.
by the infantry, and we had building targets and personality targets. The building targets were anything that had to do with the government and the Nazi Party, and anything that had to do with the uh, prosecution of war criminals. And then the personality targets were
So,
the war criminals. Well, of course, Cologne as the first city on the Rhine. When we approached, we could see the cathedral was still in good shape. When we got closer, we could see that there was some damage, but it was standing well. But anyway, in Cologne, we didn't have any personality targets because all the Germans, the official ones, had withdrawn across the Rhine and they had blown
wow.
all the bridges. So there was no connection. Well, I recall uh, the first uh, priority target we had there was a German Kaserne,
Yes.
a German installation for troops. And we got into it, and we could see the Germans had evacuated in a hurry because there were papers strewn all over the hallway. And we looked at the building upstairs, and there we found one living thing,
Hey.
a canary bird. So we were admiring the bird and sure the Germans had left him enough food and enough water. We couldn't do much, but he was happy to see us, and we were amazed to see him. And then suddenly, swoosh, an explosion outside. It was a mortar shell that came. They had spotted our Jeep from the other
Wow.
side. All right. And we dashed in, got in the vehicle, and as we were just at the vehicle, the second round came and was
Wow.
lucky it was short. And that's the way the mortars worked. One over, one short, fire for effect. And when we moved out, the last third round was right there
Wow.
where the Jeep was parked. Now that gave me a completely different perspective about the enemy because before I was in an artillery fire, but that was just general fire, and you just had to be lucky not to be in a place where the darn thing hit. But now this one,
That's
they
right.
were trying to kill me. It
Right.
was very personal. And from then on, I took these things much more seriously because they were trying to kill me in this thing. Well, anyway, uh, we got our way from there, and um, we well, not having any personality targets, we had time, extra time, and they placed us to help enforce the
Uh-huh.
enforcement of the curfew. So uh, I went with my driver at night and well, as you know, I could tell him where the hell to do, what to do, and we found a person scurrying around in the distance. I said, "Give chase," and he did a good job, and he got this person against the wall, and I got out, and I ended
Hey.
up it was a young girl. So I said, well, I'm starting to address her in German, and that got her even more perturbed. Here's an American talking German. And I'm asking her, what the heck you doing violating the curfew? And she was really hesitant and scared. And she said, we're hungry. The three of us we haven't eaten for 3 days because when the Americans approached, we had a ration card, but the rations went away because the people who operated it went across the Rhine, and we were trying to stay here. And then we had always supported us with
Yes.
a black market food, and the black market disappeared as well. So we hadn't eaten for 3 days. I said, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. What do you mean you had three people and one ration card and black market supplements? Why didn't you have three ration cards? So she was hesitant and then finally said, well, this was a Dutch lady and there was another girl and me, and she had taken us under her wing because
Oh,
we're Jewish. I said, Jewish? I was absolutely flabbergasted because all these cities had been declared
right.
Judenfreien, no more Jews in there. She said, yeah. Uh, the we had a few close calls, but she always managed to
Amazing.
hide us. I said, well, get in the Jeep. And we went to where she said they were living. Uh, and I still remember the address Stadtwaldgürtel in Cologne,
Wow.
number 49. Amazing. It's things that stick in your mind. Really. Well, her name was Ellen, but I don't
Okay.
remember the names of the others. Anyway, we got in there, and there was a Dutch lady, and there was this other young girl, and we gave them the rations we had in my Jeep, and they were eating them immediately. They were really ferociously hungry. Well, anyway, the Dutch lady said, I'm so glad you Americans are here. Although we couldn't eat anything for 3 days, I can now relax because I have cancer and I didn't know what would happen to the girls if I become incapacitated. Well, I said, look, don't worry about it. We'll get the food to you from now on. You have nothing to worry about. Went back and I saw Lieutenant Levy. I said, Lieutenant Levy, you can't believe what I found. And I told him about the two Jewish girls and the Dutch lady. Levy said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of them. So about 3 days later, I wanted to introduce who I had found to Flo, the other interpreter. And we went there and we greeted with a off limits
Uh-huh.
sign in front of the building. I don't know what the heck this is all about. So we
Okay.
didn't violate the sign because you're not supposed to go past it. Went back and I go into Levy's office. I said, what are you doing there? Why you put a off limit sign? And Levy said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So get in the Jeep with us and we go back. And of course, we go past the sign. We go in and we get greeted as the big heroes that we were. And Levy says to the Dutch lady, well, what's with this off limit sign? She said, Lieutenant, you did too good a job. He said, what do you mean I did too good a job? I said, well, you came with a big truck with all that ration, and I put them in the cellar, and then you left, and then another truck came with rations, and I put them in the cellar, and then
What?
another truck, and then another truck, and apparently they had heard about this Dutch lady and the two Jewish girls, and that they were hungry, and they weren't
Wow.
going to tolerate that. And so I didn't know what to do, she said. I went about a block away where there was an infantry unit, and I saw the captain, and I told him, how do I turn off this supply chain? And he said, I'll take care of it. And that's how they got the off-limit sign.
Crazy.
A pretty good story, isn't it? About what the Americans did when they heard
these were
things of
Belgian
that
Jewish
nature.
girls.
No, they were refugee girls from Germany, but the Dutch lady had lived there. And when she found them, I don't know how she found them, but when she found them and the Germans were coming in, she took them in and hid them and was able to keep them under cover. And of course, she said, I'm so happy you Americans came with my cancer. And well, of course, I went back about, it was after the war. I went back, was, now this was in the British zone now. Cologne was in
Before you get
British
to after
zone.
the war, my question is, were you in?
Well, I was in Germany for another year after the war because I didn't have enough points
But
to get
before you
back
get
to
to
the States.
Germany, during the war, you were in Belgium. Were you in Europe on VE Day?
Oh, yes, yes, we were. Uh, uh, as a matter of fact, we had penetrated into Germany, and we were. I'll talk to you about it a little more. But we were in at the Elbe in Magdeburg, where the line was placed by Eisenhower that we weren't going to go across the Elbe, and the Russians weren't going to go across the Elbe, and he kept the
Wow.
two parties apart that way. Yeah, and we were in the villa of Minister Funk, the guy who had the finance ministry
So
under
you never
Hitler.
made it. You never made
Well,
it.
he lost his
You never
villa.
saw a concentration camp or a death camp.
At this point, I did not see a
Uh,
concentration camp. No. What we did liberate a Russian labor camp in Wiesbaden, and that thing was right across from the Henkel champagne factory in Wiesbaden. Uh, and that was, however, it wasn't an easy thing because that thing was staffed by people who had volunteered to work for the Germans. They were Ukrainians and they hated the Russians so much that they volunteered to work for the Germans. And the other half were really
wow.
forced laborers. And we were trying to see if we could separate those two, but it was an impossibility because they all spoke only broken German, and you couldn't tell who was lying because they were always saying it's the other guy who was a volunteer. I was a forced laborer. So we just finally gave up and we regarded all of them as forced laborers. And then after the war, I had gone back to Wiesbaden for some other reasons, and we found out that they had a Russian mission that was trying to get the people who had been Russian to come back to Russia and get them out of Germany. And there was one girl, a Ukrainian girl, who had gotten back, and somehow she escaped and came back to Wiesbaden and told them that when they went back to Germany, the Russians regarded all of them as volunteers and put the men into prison and gave the women some lousy work projects, and they shaved the hair of all the women and she had come with no hair, and but after her, nobody
Right.
else went back to Russia.
Very, very
They
interesting.
didn't take
Wow,
a
wow, wow.
chance.
So, after
Yeah,
VE
that's
Day,
how it
after
was.
Victory over Europe Day, how much longer were you in Europe?
About a year. It was exactly a year, as a matter of fact. And then I
Wow.
had enough points to get back
So,
to the States, and I finally also went back and got my degree, and then got back into the army as an officer. Yeah. Well, anyway, uh, as I indicated, uh, this Cologne was the first city, and we had this concern. We had the Jewish girl, and then uh, the next job was uh, to go to Düsseldorf.
uh-huh.
That was our second city, and well, things were completely disorganized. Nobody knew what was going on. We had captured the Remagen Bridge. It had been blown, but didn't blow completely off, and it stayed
Wow.
there for 14 days before it fell in. But by then, the engineers had built another bridge, so we never lost any connection getting across the Rhine. And we had gone across this Remagen Bridge in well, it was a pretty complicated situation of people going into Holland Plata until they were called to make the crossing, and then they had to make the crossing and get the heck out of the way. So we got across the bridge, and nobody knew what was going on. So we approached the city carefully, and then we saw in the distance that there were buildings and
Sure.
white sheets were hanging out of windows.
Surrender.
They were trying to give up. And then we got closer, we could see there was a roadblock across the road we were coming in on. And you see people scurrying around, and we watched them, and we saw they were trying to take stuff off the roadblock rather than making more of a roadblock. And there was already a gap there. And as we approached closer, they saw us and they took off. There was nobody around. When we got through the gap, one of our tires got ruined because they
Okay.
must have hit us some metal stuff. And we limped into a Esso station that was right there. And I got the owner and said, "Can you change the tires?" And he said, "I'll take care of it." And then I asked him, well, "Did you see any other Americans?" He said, "No, no, no, you're the first ones." And I said to the driver, "Let's get the heck out of here." And we went back and told the captain, "Don't go in yet, wait till the infantry
Good
gets the
idea.
rest of that city." Because that was now a mission to liberate Düsseldorf. Well, anyway, um, the first party target was a conglomerate, uh, Stahlhof, which was a steel corporation,
Yes.
where they're making steel. And at that point, from the first city, they had learned that they needed experts
Deal.
in their uh, interrogations, and uh, I was placed with an economics major to go into the Stahlhof. And as we went in, all we found was a janitor, and we asked the janitor, "Can you get some people in charge this afternoon?" will come back this afternoon? He said, yep, I'll have 6 directors for you. We came back and they showed us, I met the janitor and he showed us into a big conference room, and it was beautifully furnished and in good shape. The whole building was still in good shape, fairly good shape, let's say. Well, anyway, there was a big conference table, and they were sitting around it, and there were 2 chairs left open at the head of the table, ours. So we sat down, and they offered us cigars, and I was smart enough to say no, thank you. It would have killed me. I didn't even smoke cigarettes those days. And well, anyway, he started to ask some very technical questions, and I didn't know the words in English, and I didn't know the words in German. And he realized my problem, so he scaled down what he was talking about. And we asked the Germans to give us a consolidated report as to what their assets were still in Germany. And they said, well, this would have taken us 6 months to get an accurate count. They said, no, 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 we'll give you 48 hours.
Okay.
Just do the best you can. We came back 2 days later, and they gave us the report as we needed. We turned that in for further interrogation and such. But I learned at that point that I was really not qualified for the job that I had, and that I, by God, had to go back to college to get a degree so that I could function properly. And that sure convinced me as to
We will
what my
try,
future
with your
was gonna
permission. It's already my half hour has turned into almost an hour and a half. So, with your permission, we'll try to find another time, and we'll continue your story from the end of the war.
Oh,
Thank you
for
very much.
sure.
This has been absolutely
Okay.
fascinating. And you are a wonderful. No,
I'm sorry I kept you
I'm on
here
the edge
so
of my
long.
seat.
Okay, so well, we can
Exactly.
negotiate
Exactly.
it again another
Okay.
time.
Shalom, shalom,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
good Shabbos. Shabbat shalom.
Okay. Bye bye. Yeah.
Bye bye.
Oh, good. Okay. Good job.